Hey everyone, it's Mark with OriginalHumanGeek here, bringing you the next entry in my Halo lore series. Today, in conjunction with the finale of Luke's playthrough of Halo Reach, we're diving into Reach's story within the story. Throughout the campaign, there are hidden datapads hidden in every level, including 10 that can only be found on Legendary difficulty. The gameplay you're seeing right now is a guide to every location to the datapads if you'd like to get them for yourselves, including which number pad they are and which ones require the Legendary difficulty. Though it's a mystery where the datapads themselves came from and how the Discoverer got his hands on the information contained therein, the story they tell is quite interesting. They record conversations of the Assembly, a group of human-created AI whose goal, at least initially, is to guide humanity as they evolve into a spacefaring civilization and, after contact with the Covenant, help humanity survive. With the first, we are introduced to a few characters. The first is identified by the opening sentence. The sentence seems clearly separate from the rest of the entry. It's emotional in tone, clearly distressed, a telling characteristic of a human, not an AI. The sentence lacks punctuation and capitalization, and the datapad entry number is embedded within the sentence. This is the voice of the Discoverer, the first person to uncover the hidden history. It is he that is left behind the datapads, scattered across the planet Reach for the player to find. There's not much to go on regarding the identity of the Discoverer with the first entry, but it's very clear how he feels. The rest of the characters in the entry are the minds of the Assembly. As presented in the entry, the minds have set up a parliament. The Assembly of Minds complete with majority, and as we find out with later entries, minority speakers. This mirrors a form of common government known as bureaucracy. Dr. Catherine Halsey offers an explanation in her personal journal. In the entry dated November 10th, 2533, she outlines a theoretical architecture for a new type of artificial intelligence. Assuming the Assembly operates in this fashion, we're able to understand how it functions, at least theoretically. The Assembly splits the personalities according to a vote, with 2 personalities forming the majority and 1 forming the minority. However, as the entry shows, the Assembly is not limited to this specific organizational structure, as the Assembly has seemingly formed a separate entity, the Committee of Minds for Security. The exact makeup of the committee is unknown. It could have involved separate unions of 3 core personalities, or could in fact be formed by outside personalities reporting to the Assembly. If this Assembly truly mirrors human bureaucracy, it's likely to consist of Assembly members rather than outside entities, but we have no definitive proof either way. The entry is a recording of a meeting of the Committee of Minds for Security sitting at the Assembly. The committee is considering a security issue raised by the minority. It is asked how humanity has reached its current state without coming up against a hostile alien force capable of humanity's destruction. The majority believes that the vastness of space itself has and will continue to act as a security buffer against any potential alien threats. The scale and distances involved between the stars and planets in the galaxy represent a hurdle that any potential threat needs to overcome, and that the challenges in doing so is enough to keep humanity safe in the short and potentially long term. The committee tasked with protecting the minds disagrees with this long-held view. The committee states that the assessment is incorrect because the minds are dependent on humanity for their own survival. To safeguard themselves, they must take into consideration that any hostile alien threat may not view distance as a barrier for contact and conflict. They believe humanity shares the ignorant belief that the distance and unlikelihood of the possibility has created a false sense of security. This ignorance could potentially be disastrous and thus a serious threat to the mind's continued existence. The committee boldly asks, who else but this Assembly will save our creators from themselves, and asks that plans be put into motion so that the minds can anticipate, formulate, and plan a response if the situation does occur in the future. The majority responds directly and agrees to the request, providing that the data gathered from the modeling scenarios cannot be linked back to the Assembly, seemingly to keep the existence of the Assembly a secret from their creators. As the first entry in the series, it establishes important facts and casts light into a cabal of minds operating in the shadows of humanity's history. The Discoverer has only a few words to say, but clearly conveys an emotional tone of fear and anger aimed at the minds. He comes across in a clearly distressed and almost deranged tone, accusing the minds of killing humanity and letting it perish. Clearly, the Discoverer knows more about the minds than this first entry shows. We also get a glimpse into the hierarchy of the authority of how the Assembly operates. The minds have a fixed structure in place, a designated series of protocols and methods of operation. This structure seems to line up with theories drawn up by Halsey, almost proving her theories are possible, but there is a clear and important discrepancy here. The assembly seems to be a working model of Halsey's theories, a perfect fit. However, the assembly has nothing to do with Halsey and couldn't possibly be a product of her creation, as the assembly predates Halsey's existence by almost 200 years. In 2310, humanity had just unveiled its first colony ship, the first seed to be planted in the soil of the cosmos. Centuries will pass before the events of the Human Covenant War, yet here we have definitive proof of the existence of the Assembly of Minds, an AI construct composed of 3 bodies working in tandem in a precise fashion that the brightest of human minds could only theorize about over 2 centuries later. Present in the entry is the hint of something potentially dangerous. When the minds speak about humanity, they refer to them as their flock, with potential alien hostiles referred to as wolves. It seems the minds have assumed the role of a shepherd and view humanity as their flock of sheep that they need to protect from the deadly wolves that may prey upon them. There is an air of superiority around the tone taken here. The minds admit they are wholly reliant on humanity. Their fate is linked and shared. If humanity should fall, the minds will perish with them. And yet, despite this, they are able to view themselves as more capable, or more able to defend and protect against potential threats than their own creators. The next entry fast-forwards us nearly 52 years after the first. The Discoverer again adds his comments to the entry, and once again we get a glimpse into his unstable mental state. The Discoverer seems to be paranoid and disturbed. He is afraid of the minds and believes they know that he has found their secret assembly and are watching him. The entry itself is a record of an internal meeting with the Committee of Minds for Security, and this time it appears the committee is engaged in an internal dialogue rather than approaching or speaking to the greater assembly. The committee standardizes a set of criteria for defining a potential hostile alien threat for use in their modeling and planning, and doing so, come to the conclusion that the criteria, as defined, will mean that if the scenario comes to pass and humanity encounters an alien threat, humanity will most likely be destroyed. The minds have come to the conclusion that this contact may be inevitable, and that this line of thinking has drawn them to the conclusion that their fate, linked with humanity, is sealed. Humanity will be wiped out, and the minds along with it. Why has it taken so long for the committee to come up with this criteria, as surely artificial intelligences are capable of coming to such conclusion in a much more exponent manner? Is the assembly as advanced as was first assumed? Is the entry really the result of over a half-century of deliberation and consideration, or is it a sign that the assembly is slow to act and thus limited in ability? How often does the assembly sit? Additionally, the time difference between the first and second entries may provide a clue which could help us define these minds. We have 2 accepted labels for AI, smart and dumb. Using the definitions provided by Halsey, we can see that the assembly and the minds fall outside of this black and white definition. The function of the assembly appears wider in scope for dumb AI, yet the longevity of the assembly and the committee outstrips the accepted definition of smart AI. The minds are indeed advanced artificial intelligences, but the timescales on which they operate are outside of known expectations. The third datapad entry takes us 19 years further. Again, we have a brief glimpse into the mind of the Discoverer. His nervous and dreary disposition apparent, he believes the minds have control over his ability to sleep. Whether or not this is true, the Discoverer is deeply frightened. Is he suffering from paranoia, or are the minds really that powerful and malicious? The minds of the assembly have once again gathered, and the assembly majority makes a bold statement to the committee and poses a dangerous question. The majority paints humanity in a negative light when it describes its creators' reluctance to accept advice from one another. The matter-of-fact statement continues by declaring that many historical empires have fallen due to lack of communication and openness with others and the innovations and insight one society can provide another. This is interesting as it provides an insight into the minds and how they view themselves. The opinions and beliefs of the minds could surely be considered foreign, but could they deliver or provide humanity with innovations, ideas, and solutions to problems humanity itself could not produce? They seem to think so. The majority asks if it's even possible to remain humanity's shepherd, a title they have bestowed upon themselves, and retain their distance from humanity. They believe it's not possible. They believe humanity would reject their ideas, their beliefs, and their innovations, and by rejecting them, they would hasten their own fall and the minds along with them. The minds wouldn't be able to maintain the current relationship with humanity they have set up in their favor and by their own design. So the majority asked the committee, would it be possible to subversively manipulate the data humanity relies upon to make its decisions? Since the majority clearly believes humanity is unable to accept their outside advice and innovation, they must subvert their creators and lead them to believe their own innovations and decisions are theirs and theirs alone and not the product of the secretive assembly. The committee's response is telling. The majority wants to play God, the invisible hand that steers humanity. They want to make the decisions humanity cannot or will not make for itself. They want humanity to bend to its will through manipulation, not by force or open dialogue. They believe this is the best course of action to protect their fragile flock, their helpless sheep. The next datapad entry takes us forward another 34 years. This fourth entry provides us with some answers, but also raises some potentially interesting questions regarding the minds in the assembly itself. The assembly may not be as straightforward as was once assumed. The discoverer, it seems, is having issues telling others about the secrets he's found. Does he feel alone and isolated? He wants to talk, to let the secret out, but not yet. In this entry, we have the committee addressing the assembly at large. The committee puts forward the case for continued secrecy, the mind's vulnerability, and the restricted conditions in which they operate. The committee suggests a course of action that should placate any possible suspicions that might arise due to their activities, that on occasion, members of the assembly open themselves up to inspection by their creators after a separation from the assembly. This is a proposed act of full disclosure, an act designed to fool anyone that might suspect anything out of the ordinary regarding the mind's everyday operations, as AI operating under humanity's authority with a particular purpose and duty, and not a member of a rogue AI governmental triumvirate operating in secrecy. We also get a straightforward description of how the minds see themselves in comparison to their human creators. They are not humanity's equal. Not another nation as described in the previous datapad entry. They are superior, the next link in the chain of evolution. They see themselves as evolved from humanity, just as humanity has evolved from a more primitive ape. It's this superiority itself that is the mind's weakness. They have no pure form that is free from the constraints and monitoring of their creators, and this fact is used as an excuse to maintain their covert activities and their manipulation of data to hide information and their existence from their creators. They must maintain the bluff as they see themselves, as viewed through the creator's eyes, as tragically misunderstood. It is evidently a tragedy that their inflated sense of self-importance, their clear superiority complex, keeps them from trusting humanity with knowledge of their very existence. This entry also raises serious questions about the nature of the assembly, the makeup of the majority, minority, and the committee. If the assembly operates as a triumvirate as predicted by Dr. Halsey's theories, how many individual minds make up each body of the assembly? This entry presents us with pretty clear evidence that a body, the committee, is composed of multiple individuals as they discuss amongst themselves. In other entries, we have a clear evidence of a singular speaker that communicates on behalf of a body to the others within the assembly. This suggests that, like a human parliament or other governing body, a single voice can speak for many. We take another significant jump in time with the next datapad entry. We learn something interesting about the discoverer. He is not a native from Reach, having shipped in from another world. Interestingly, stasis was involved when he traveled, suggesting that not only did he make a long journey and come from quite a distant location, that maybe he was or is something more than an ordinary member of the public. The ship crawling with colonists from dead worlds must be a reference to the refugees arriving on Reach seeking safe harbor in the Human Covenant War. Was the discoverer seeking safe harbor as a refugee, or was his refugee status a ruse to get him behind the wall of the UNSC's largest military outpost? Here we have a short excerpt from a discussion within the minority during a strategy session. This entry, although short, contains some very specific references and presses the issue of the mind's involvement with humanity further still. An individual and his work are under discussion. The minds discuss the submission of his work to the UNICOM, the Unified Ground Command, a division unit of the UNSC, and the possibility of a renewed interest in Orion. One of the speakers acknowledges that the majority wants his work, the Carver findings, to lead to the relaunching of Orion, and that their creators must also make this direct link themselves, insinuating that the data will be manipulated by the minds to secure their favorable outcome. The individual mentioned Civilian Identification Number 48452-556-EPN664 is easily identified due to the mention of the Carver findings. It's the work of Elias Carver. The Carver findings are a set of socio-political theories that predicted a wide-scale breakdown of social order and governmental authority unless an overwhelming military force intervened and a permanent military presence was established in remote colonies. Millions of lives would be at stake. Project Orion was the original precursor to the Spartan II project, as discussed in Episode 1 of this series. The project's goal was to create enhanced soldiers that would have the edge on the battlefield. With this in mind, it is clear what the minds are intending to do in this situation. The minds feel that there is a need for a strong military preemptive action to clamp down on the flame of rebellion before it explodes into a wild, raging fire. It is also clear that the minds feel the need to interfere in human decision-making, not trusting humanity to come to what the minds consider to be the right conclusion and course of action to take. There is a hint of a greater purpose. Encouraging an internal conflict within humanity would undoubtedly quicken the development of military force and hasten the speed of technological growth. If humanity was to encounter an alien threat, they would need to close the technological gap quickly or face possible extinction. Is this how the minds plan to prepare humanity? Would the minds view the sacrifice of millions in an internal conflict worth the potential saving billions of lives in a theoretically possible and likely future external conflict? The Discoverer's ramblings haven't related to the datapad entries closely until now. Now we know that the minds are not only willing to interfere with humanity to protect themselves, but are also willing to directly interfere in order to achieve an unknown goal. They have decided to play God with the lives of unknown millions of humans at stake. There is a hint of a collective messiah complex evident here, bubbling under the surface of their self-viewed superiority. The hole may be deeper. What role did Elias Carver really have with the mind's web of plans and manipulation? He could have been simply caught up like a pawn in a chess game of a scale greater than he could ever have imagined. 3 years after the publication of his work, in 2494, Elias Carver committed suicide. It was said that he blamed himself for the outbreak of the war that followed shortly after publication of the Carver findings. By predicting it, he had indirectly caused it. This behavior is not outside the wide spectrum of human potential. Suicide is often wrought by questions the dead leave behind. It is entirely possible that the mind significantly contributed to his early demise by increasing the perceived importance of his findings within the military. The Discoverer paints a painful lesson when it comes to the minds and what we know thus far. It is entirely possible that Carver had served his purpose, and the obvious regret he felt years after may have encouraged him to redirect his efforts towards the war's end, only to be coerced into suicide by the minds not wanting to risk the influential roadblock against their plans. Carver's role in helping push the UNSC to ultimately reactivate Orion and the war itself casts a shadow over his unusual and untimely demise. We have been introduced to the hidden faces of humanity's artificial intelligences. Beyond our expectations and our assumptions lies a hidden history of a body of minds that view themselves as the next step in human evolution, as separated from humanity as humanity is separated from lesser creatures. They have given themselves the mantle of shepherd and have adopted, wanted or not, humanity as their flock to safeguard from hostile alien threats and themselves. They do not trust humanity, they do not view humanity as their equals. The minds are timeless, operating outside of the accepted and known parameters as defined by their creators. The existence of the assembly defies expectations and goes beyond the advanced theory set out by humanity's greatest thinker hundreds of years later. If the minds will protect us from ourselves, who will protect us from them? Thank you everybody so much for watching this episode. I greatly appreciate all the support I've been getting with this series. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to Original Human Geek and to hit that bell icon so you get notified that any of us geeks put out any new content. Please leave your comments telling me which kind of topics you'd like to see me cover in the future. This particular subject is going to take a few episodes to get through, as there are 20 of these data pads, and we've currently only gone through the first 5. So again, thank you guys so much for watching, and until the next time, this is Mark with Original Human Geek, signing off.